Jesus is teaching the crowd. He's on a very important subject. He's talking about beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And he's very rudely interrupted in what he's saying by someone, we're told, according to Luke chapter 12, verse 13, someone in the crowd who said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. So eager was this man to resolve this problem in his life. It was a problem of money. It was a problem with his brother. He wanted him to divide the family inheritance. He felt he had a right to that inheritance. He was keen and eager to gain that inheritance, so much so that he interrupts Jesus in more important spiritual things to resolve this problem for him. Jesus rebukes him. He says to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter over you? I haven't come for these matters. These are not the things of which I'm concerned. Why are you looking to me to be the arbiter or judge of these things?" Then he said in verse 15, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." So now he uses the occasion to teach another very important lesson for all of us. He says, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. Now, you might think, well, Jesus is being a bit harsh here, isn't he? The man was looking for his rights. If the family inheritance is to be divided, the brother had no right to hold on to it. He should have just divided it. But obviously, the brother was greedy. And this man was so intent on getting this money or land or whatever it was that was involved, maybe both, that he showed his greed. Is it possible then to be greedy in legitimate things? And why is it wrong to want more in legitimate things? Well, Jesus answers that question. He goes on, told them a parable. He says, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? And he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. But I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Now again, this doesn't say or suggest at all that this farmer was in any way evil or using evil means to make gain for himself. His land was very productive. It was what God gave him. He was probably a good husbandman. That's looking after the cattle, not looking after the wife. He was probably good with the farm and everything to do with the farm. And he was obviously very efficient, hard-working individual. But what was wrong here was that all the material things had got a grip on his soul to the extent and exclusion of everything else. And in obviously his heart was desirous or greedy for this gain, because it seems like he worked hard to make the gain, and when he reached the zenith of this gain, all his ambitions and hopes for the future were realized. He had enough now, more than enough now, to take his ease, don't have to work that hard anymore, eat, drink, and be merry, I'll have a life of ease, a life of self-indulgence, a life of joy and bliss. Everything is just perfect for me. I couldn't have asked for more. That's the spirit of this age, you know. We're all doing this. We're all building our little empire so that we will be at ease. We all want more all the time. We're never satisfied. When we've got something, when we long for it, we get it. Then a short while after that, we're longing for something else, something better, something that I haven't got, something that somebody else has. We're longing for it. We want it. We're eager to get it. We're greedy to get it. His problem, as Jesus points out, was this, verse 20. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared?" The mistake of thinking that my life is secure by my material possessions is for us to believe a lie. It is no more secure when you're poor than when you're rich. And your life is definitely not your possessions. It is much more than your possessions. We fail to realize that in this age or generation of plenty. The Lord required his soul that night. And all the effort and all the greed and the longing and all the security that he thought he had was going to be gone, and he would go into eternity as poor as the poorest beggar on the street. He brought nothing with him. And he was even poorer than the beggar on the street, because if the blind man in John chapter 9 is anything to go on, some of those beggars came to understand lots about God and trust God and find the Messiah and live to worship and serve him. But this man had forgotten God. His priority, I'm not saying that he wasn't a Jew. I'm not saying that he didn't understand about God. I'm not even saying that he didn't go to the temple and serve the Lord the way all the other Jews did at the time. It's just that God wasn't his priority. His farm, his business, his well-being, his future. He didn't connect all of those things with God. He only connected those things with himself. But it was God who gave him the bountiful harvests. And had God pulled the plug on him, he could have had famines for years and not made any gains whatsoever. So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God, he says. That's the man. There's got to be a balance in life, brethren. There's got to be a balance in life. We do have to look after ourselves, there's no question about that. But we also have to look after our family. And the other members of our family have the right to be given the legitimate love and care and attention that is their right. Yeah, you've got to look after your job, no question. If the job is providing the money for you to pay the bills and to buy a little luxury, you have to look after the job. But you can't look after the job and deny God his rights. There's got to be a balance. You've got to be looking after the job knowing that the Lord has given you the work. The Lord is looking after you in your work. You're hopefully bringing the Lord into your daily work and asking Him for the help whenever you need the help, for the protection whenever you need the protection, for the wisdom whenever you need the wisdom, that you're in constant communication with God about what's going on in your job. God has a right to be worshipped. God has a right to be acknowledged. God has a right to be submitted to and to be served. And we need to see to those rights. It is not fair. If you're not giving your wife her rights or your husband his rights, is that fair? Everybody complains about that. No, that's not fair. You're not being fair. Well, when it comes to God, do you think we're being fair with Him? And does He not feel it? Is God unaware that He has rights? Does He not demand the rights? Not because He needs such attention. It's because it is right and good that this service be done to Him and for Him. Every form of greed. Money is a huge factor in greed. It seems to bring it out for the most part. 1 Timothy chapter 6 here. Verses 9 and 10. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it, doesn't mean they ever get it, but just by longing for it, here's where the greed is, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Hidden distresses, pains of mind and body, all of that comes from the love of money. But there are other areas in our life where greed enters in. We're not satisfied with what the Lord has provided for us. The greed enters in sexual matters as well as in other aspects of our lives. And in Ephesians chapter 4, he has to remind the Christians about what they were when they were Gentiles and how they walked as Gentiles, and tell them that this can't be, you can't return to this lifestyle. It says in verse 17, so this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. It talks about in Scripture men with eyes full of adultery. I know women are beautiful to look at. But the fellas in the cars are riding along and they're nearly breaking their neck to see who's walking down the road with the miniskirt on, or the blonde hair, or whatever other thing has attracted you to them. What are we looking for, lads? Did the Lord not say, if we lust after a woman in our heart, we've committed a sin already? Are we greedy for more than what the Lord has provided for us? Are we going to be looking for more than we have, not being content with what we have? Why inflame yourself that way? We can't be like the Gentiles anymore. Impurity with greediness. And it has to do with sensuality, which you get on the pornography sites. You can't get off the pornography sites when you get on them, not because the pornography sites keep jumping up when you go on your computer. It's because the devil and the wickedness has got into your heart and it won't let you go. It is better never to visit those places than to torment yourself by starting into them. It produces a greediness for pleasurable things, lustful things, which can never bring happiness to your life or to your family or to anybody else that you care to suck into that vortex of lust that's in your heart. There's also greediness for power. There's a huge greediness for power in our day and time. There's a story about Abimelech. Remember we were studying about Gideon? Now, Abimelech was one of his sons. And it's in the book of Judges. Let's go to Judges chapter 9. Gideon had died. He'd never become king, as you know. He renounced that, and he renounced the idea of a dynasty for himself. But this young fella, young man, he was greedy for power. And it says in verse 1 of chapter 9, and Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal, which was Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and spoke to them and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rule over you. Also remember that I am your bone and your flesh. Gideon had many wives, but this young man was the son of a concubine. She was a second-class wife, probably a slave. And these women had children for men who were powerful so that they might be able to get their sons into a position of power. And no doubt his mother encouraged him all her life. You're the son of Gideon. Jerubbaal, the leader, everybody looks up to him. You will one day take his place. Mothers, be very careful what you're teaching your children. Be careful what longings you build into them, what greed you incite in them. Anyway, the people of Shechem decided that they had been overlooked far too long. Now they see an opportunity for themselves in this Abimelech fella, and they said he's a relative. Yeah, it wasn't that really that was inciting them to give him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal Berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed the brothers of the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. Now here's the greed and the manifestation of the fact that where greed is involved, murder is not far behind. He wanted this power, and he didn't want to be challenged in this power, so he just killed his own half-brothers, 70 of them. No mean task. And that in a public way as well. What sort of madness is in people's hearts when they're willing to do this sort of thing? We have all these warring factions in African countries. They're talking about liberating their people and their country. Of course, that's the propaganda. That's the sales pitch. What they're concerned about is having the power. And when they get into power, they're worse than the people they put out of power. But you see, maybe our desire for power is not on such a grand scale. But greed for power causes problems. Greed for money causes problems. Greed for pleasures causes problems. Greed is the problem. It's excessive wanting. And it can apply to lots of things. Think of the alcoholic. He's addicted. No. The Bible would say he's greedy. He wants and wants and wants more of the same that give him fulfillment. He's greedy for it. It casts a different light on things, doesn't it? So, we've got to be watching out. Beware of greed, covetousness, and selfishness. You're walking in the country. Beautiful summer's day. And you want to take a shortcut down to the river, which you can see down in the valley here. But there's a sign in one of the fields that says, beware of the bull. Now, if you're a city slicker, you probably think, sure, if there's a bull there, I'll outrun him. I can hide from him. I can get where I want to go quickly, and I'm going to do it. And you get into the middle of the field, and this old thing comes up and looks at you, and sniffs the ground, and snorts again, and you're wetting yourself because you know you're in trouble. But you should have paid attention to the sign. You shouldn't have crossed that field and taken that chance. Signs of warning are not there for nothing. The fact that we are told by Jesus to beware of every form of greed means to beware. Get it in your head, there's a danger here. Get it in your head, it applies to me. It's endangering my life. And that's exactly just what we have to do. You know, this greed leads to covetousness. They're in the same genre. Covetousness is more specific. It's a passion for wanting more, for selfish gain. And that passion will drive you to get what you want, regardless of what it costs, of the cost to anyone. Anyone. You don't care who you hurt in trying to get to your goal, to get what you want. Covetousness brings a mean spirit. We can see that when he's talking about the contribution, which is very unusual, in 2 Corinthians 9 verse 5. They had promised a year ago, the Corinthians, to make this contribution. Obviously a few did, too many didn't. And he's saying, now it's urgent now, I'm coming, it needs to be done. You put that money in on this first day of the week so that it'll be ready when I come, and that it will not be tainted by covetousness. In other words, you know what happens? We've seen it in the political arena. Gaza being blown to smithereens, the world community promising millions to try and rebuild it, and at the end of the day, a year or two later, very little money has come. See, we know what the right response is, but when it boils down to it, well, that'll leave me very short, and that'll blow a hole in our finances, and that means I might have to suffer here. There's no way I'm going to suffer with this. They just have to manage themselves. We care less about other people. It's only about ourselves. And that's what covetousness does. It gives us a mean spirit. We're mean and we're stingy. We're stingy. You can think of the Scrooge counting out his money. Fellow with his purse looking at what he's got, holding it so that nobody will see it. We become stingy. We don't want to share because we don't care. It's me and what I want. And this covetousness forces us into areas that we shouldn't be in. Look at John chapter 12. Mary had anointed Jesus' feet at the supper that they'd given for him. And Judas Iscariot, we're told in verse 4, one of his disciples who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people?" John's comment is, now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. When Jesus and the apostles were going around, they had no means of sustenance except what those good women in Luke chapter 8 provided for them. They had given that money to support the preaching of the gospel, to support Jesus, to support the other apostles. And here's this light-fingered pilferer sticking his hands in the money box because he was greedy and covetous. And who was he robbing? Jesus and the apostles, good people. It's not been unknown for treasurers in the church to rob from the contribution. How sick is that? But when covetousness enters our hearts, we care nothing, only about our grasping and carping after what we think we need or what we want. And what I want is more and more and more. And as I say, it's not a matter of considering anybody else, because you couldn't care less who it hurts or what the consequences are for other people, so long as you're all right, Jack. I don't mean any reflection on Jack. There's just an expression, okay? All right. Now, one of the things that surprises me is what Paul says about covetousness in Romans 7 and verse 7. He's talking about the law, and he says, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? May it never be. On the contrary, I would not have come to know sin except through the law. For I would not have known about coveting if the law had not said, you shall not covet. Now, what I understand this to be saying is, just left to ourselves, not even our conscience would trouble us with the desire for more and more and more and more. It doesn't trouble us. He says, I wouldn't have known that it was wrong, except the law said, thou shalt not covet. That's the 10th commandment. He's looking at his neighbour's wife, at his neighbour's field, at his neighbour's donkey. He was coveting these things. Evil, it's in the soul, and it's an evil of a very nasty type that allows us to want what doesn't belong to us, to take from somebody else who it does belong to. And not because we haven't got anything ourselves, it's because I haven't got enough of what I want here. Whether it's money or pleasure or drink or sex, I haven't got enough. It's not satisfying me. But like greed, this has repercussions far beyond the sinister little greediness or covetousness in our own hearts. Romans chapter 13. He says in verse 8, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbour has fulfilled the law. For this, you shall not covet, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. Now Paul gives a summary of the law, but he links all these things together: adultery, murder, stealing, and covetousness. And all of those things probably rest on the foundation of covetousness. Why would you commit adultery? Because I'm covetous, I'm greedy, I'm passionate about having more of what I believe I need to fulfill myself. Why would you murder? Because those sons are in my way, they're blocking me getting what I want for myself. And getting rid of them is the easiest way to get what I want for myself. You hear terrible things. Young people killing their parents in order to get the inheritance. Killing them after a lifetime of sacrifice and work on their behalf. They're heartless and cruel to kill their own parents in order to have money and possessions for themselves. Happens. Maybe more than we think. Stealing. What's stealing all about? If a person will work, the Lord will provide his needs. But he just doesn't want to work. That doesn't mean he doesn't want money. The thief thinks about money all the time. Now, you may be stealing to justifying it by saying, well, I'm on heroin. I need at least €300 a day to keep my addiction going. Oh, you do? Your addiction is covetousness, and you're also being covetous with trying to get what you need to feed your addiction. So on both counts, you're wrong. And stealing is wrong. So you can see how sinister all this stuff is. It's very, very, very sinister indeed. And it's all, the covetousness and the greed comes out of selfishness. We think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. I deserve a better life. I deserve to have what they have. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be fulfilled. I'm the most important person in the world. Not even God stands a chance in my life when it comes to me. It's me that is the God. I'm a God. I worship myself. I love myself. Oh, that vision of a fella getting dressed up to go out. He's got the open shirt and the hair's all sticking out from his chest. He's got a big medallion, all his hair's all pushed back and combed. And he's looking at himself in the mirror and thinking, God, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I know that's an exaggeration of things, but there's a little bit of that in all our lives. I'm so happy with me. I really love you. Kissing yourself in the mirror. Okay, well, get that picture. Keep that picture in your mind next time you look in the mirror. Maybe you'll walk away more quickly. So it's this selfishness, and the selfishness is what drives us to love the money, to be greedy, to love possessions. Look in 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 1, but realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come. Brethren, if ever there was anything to identify the last days, it's this, and we're looking at it straight in the face. For men will be lovers of self. Now notice, lovers of God should be first. If this was a table of worthy attributes, lovers of God would be first. But these are unworthy attributes. Lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of God, treacherous, reckless, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Lovers of pleasure. Lovers of self, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure. Sound like a good description of the average person in this generation? I think so. Even some of these people are religious. It says in verse 5, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. Godliness, fear of God, is supposed to have contained our love for ourselves because we love God more than ourselves. It's supposed to contain the greed because we are satisfied with what God has given us. It is supposed to contain the covetousness because it's sinful and wrong. So they denied the power of religion. The power of the fear of God. If God is our God and He's looking after us and providing for us and protecting us and gives us everything, the very life that we live is in His control. If that is true, then religion, your faith, has a power because it's a power that comes from God, which is able to alter your life and help you to be what you ought to be. And that's what I want you to see. That's really and truly what I want you to see. In loving yourself, you love money because you think money is power. Power is what I want. the respect of other people, even though I don't care for them very much, but it is nice to hear the praises. It's great. And all of that just leads us to be involved in the materialism of the age. And Jesus says you can't serve God and mammon. Now you've got to make a choice. Doesn't mean you can't work. You have to work. God tells you have to work. It doesn't mean that a fair wage and even fair interest and fair gain, there's nothing wrong with that. It's the sordid gain. You're willing to use any and every means to get what you want. There's something very wrong with that. So, what are we saying here? We're saying that we are to beware. Beware of what? Beware of greed. Beware of what? Beware of covetousness. Beware of what? Beware of selfishness. And with the Lord's help, we will take heed. We will ask God for what we need and nothing more. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 30. Verses 7 through 9. I think this should be the attitude of our heart. Two things I ask of you. I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Just give me what I need. What is enough? Feed me with the food that is my portion. He believed that God wanted everybody to have food, just like he wanted everybody to have water. But he says, feed me with my portion, that I may not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God. Let's try and learn to recognize that God set my limitations, God expands my boundaries, whether in poverty or in riches. I know that the main objective of my life is to serve the Lord and to do what is right. Let's not be caught. Let's beware. Take heed to the warnings that the Lord gives us about these things, and I think it'll serve us well. Thank you.